Hi again, everybody. Julian the drummer here, Bristol record collector. I thought this time I'd go over a few 50s rock and roll LPs by some of the most important artists of that era. Um, the thing to remember, I suppose, about albums back then is that the concept of the album hadn't really taken any form. That didn't really start to happen until the early 1960s, I suppose, with the beat groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and people like that. So in the 1950s, the hit single was the big thing that everybody wanted. So uh, LPs, as they were known then, long players, um, were nothing much more than, I suppose, glorified compilations where the record companies thought, well, um, we better get an LP out by this artist, and what we'll do is we'll just throw a few of their singles on there with some B-sides, and a few other odd recordings that they happen to have made around about the same time. So bearing that in mind, that was the sort of thing you would get on an LP in the mid to late 1950s. Um, and I guess that it was because LPs were also quite expensive as well. Hence the introduction of the EP, where you could get 4 tracks by that artist to get a sample of what was on the LP. But anyway, these are a few that I've got in my collection by the important artists of that era. So we're talking roughly 1956 to 1960. Um, and the first one I'm going to show you is by the person who many people consider to be the king of rock and roll. Um, he's not my king of rock and roll. I'll tell you who that is a bit later. But of course, it's Elvis Presley. And this is the first Elvis album that was issued in the UK, commonly known as Rock and Roll. And just a quick word about how Elvis's records were released in the UK. Of course, his first label in America was Sun Records, based in Memphis, which is a very small label and didn't have much in the way of distribution because it didn't have the financial clout. So when Elvis's contract was bought by Tom Parker and he moved to RCA, what they did was buy up all the old Sun recordings and put them out again. Now in the UK, RCA's product was distributed by EMI, and it was released on the His Master's Voice label. So I was very lucky to get a copy of this, Elvis's first album in the UK, on His Master's Voice. And I'll just show you this. There's a lovely old RCA label there. This record itself, I would say it's a VG minus, so it plays okay. There's a few scratches on it, but I picked it up in the late 1990s. Not top price, as you can imagine. The sleeve isn't bad actually, because album sleeves in those days were pretty flimsy. There's a little tear there you can see. It's laminated on the front and the back, and the back is pretty free of stains and marks, which is good. Quick run through the tracks on here. Well, it's Elvis classic rock and roll. Blue Suede Shoes, I Got a Woman, I'm Counting on You, I'm Left Your Right, She's Gone, That's All Right, which of course is a Sun recording that was bought up by RCA. Money Honey, Mystery Train, another original Sun one. I'm going to sit right down and cry over you. Trying to Get to You, One Sided Love Affair, Lordy Miss Claudie, and Shake, Rattle and Roll. Absolute Elvis classics. Elvis at his best in many people's mine too. Rock and Roll number 2 came out a few months after this, which has got more of the same on it. A few ballads in there as well. But to many people's, in many people's opinion, this was Elvis at his best. Just before he started making films. Joe Hasrock, I guess, has got its moments. There's some great tracks from that soundtrack, and maybe King Creole as well. But after that, it all went a bit kind of middle of the road, especially when Elvis went into the army. So that's why I personally don't think Elvis was the king of rock and roll. I know there'll be lots of comments below contradicting me, but please leave me your opinions. But that aside, Elvis' first album, great one to get hold of, and of course it's been reissued over the years, so you can get if you're not fussed about getting an original one, which is going to cost a lot of money, then an RCA repressing from the early 60s onwards shouldn't be too hard to get hold of. Right, the next artist is somebody who could have taken over Elvis's mantle as the king of rock and roll when Elvis went into the army. But certain events, all very well documented, meant that didn't happen. But this is Jerry Lee Lewis. Now, I don't have any original Jerry Lee Lewis albums on London. Of course, he was another artist who recorded with Sun Records and actually stayed there for a few years as well until the early 60s. But that said, something like this is worth getting hold of. This is Original Golden Hits Volume 1, and it's on it's an American pressing on Sun from the early 70s, and there were lots of these that came up. You can see them advertised on the back. There's Original Golden Hits Volume 2, there was a Volume 3 as well, and I've got a few of those, but this has got Jerry Lee's great hits on it, basically the first few years. Crazy Arms, End of the Road, Great Balls of Fire, It'll Be Me, Move On Down the Line, You Win Again, Whole Lot of Shaking Going On, Little Queenie, Breathless, Teenage Letter and Lewis Boogie. All great Jerry Lee classics, which were recorded just before he made that ill-fated tour of Britain in 1958. Like I say, he still carried on with Sun Records until 1962 or 3, I think it was, before he moved to Mercury. The records on the London label aren't too hard to find, but like I say, this and the subsequent volumes are well worth getting hold of, and they've got that, still got the classic Sun label, there we are, which never really changed over the years. There are also some compilations on the Charlie label, because they distributed Sun for a little while in the mid-1970s. I was surprised actually to see how many recordings Jerry Lee made for Sun. There's hundreds of them, it seems, and they're all quite easy to find. So there we are, Jerry Lee Lewis. The next great artist, the next great rock and roll artist to talk about is Buddy Holly, and this is the album that did it for me, really. I suppose the first record I really heard, because my brother had it. He bought it when it came out in 1957, and this is the Chirping Crickets. And the first few of these were actually on the Vogue Choral label, which are quite hard to get hold of. So this is a second issue, the more regular one on the standard Choral label. And there we are. Fantastic. Lovely old Choral Records label there. And this copy I found is a pretty good one as well. VG, I suppose I have this one. I see it's even got an original, well, it looks like an original inner sleeve. And they gave all the instructions about how to take care of your record. Yeah, they used to term them long playing micro groove flexible record. How about that? Again, quite a flimsy sleeve, but it stood the test of time pretty well, actually. There's no real problems with it. And the tracks on this, well, you all heard them. Oh Boy, Not Fade Away, You've Got Love, Maybe Baby, It's Too Late, Tell Me How, That'll Be the Day, I'm Looking for Someone to Love, An Empty Cup, A Broken Date, Send Me Some Lovin', Last Night, and Rock Me My Baby. As I said, this is a perfect example of an album which is not really an album as such. It's got lots of hit singles on it, with a few additional recordings to make it into an LP, which is what was done at the time. And it was listed, it was put out under the name of The Crickets. Of course, a lot of Buddy Holly stuff was also just under his own name, but it was for contractual reasons originally. I think that they thought of the group named the Crickets because, as far as That'll Be the Day was concerned, Buddy Holly had already recorded that when he had his short ill-fated experience with US Decca, and so that meant that he couldn't release it and record it again under the name of Buddy Holly. So they had to, because it was such a great song, a very strong rock and roll number, and Choral Records thought, well, Brunswick as it was, thought that it was too good to not put out, so they put it out under the name of the Crickets with no mention of Buddy Holly. I mentioned Brunswick label then. What happened was, in America, the Crickets were signed to Brunswick and Buddy Holly himself was on Choral. However, in the UK, American Brunswick stuff appeared on UK Choral anyway, so there wasn't any real difference as far as the UK market was concerned. But just to add to the complications, any American Decca stuff appeared over in the UK on Brunswick. So if you're still with me, that means that when Buddy Holly's earlier stuff for US Decca came out in Britain, it appeared on Brunswick. I'll leave you to ponder over that one. But anyway, there we are, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, the Chirping Crickets. Fantastic record. Another major artist was this guy, and another one who tragically died too young. And this is Eddie Cochran. And I was very lucky to pick up this a few years back. It's his first album that was issued in Britain, appeared on London, and it's Singing to My Baby. Now, as well as some great rock and rollers, this has also got some great ballads that Eddie recorded. It was issued in 1957. And this is condition-wise, this is as good as you'll get, I think. Hardly any marks on it at all, and it's on the lovely old maroon or plum, as it was, London label. Liberty Records was who Eddie Cochran was signed to, and of course all their early stuff came out on London. And this has got some classics on it: Sitting in the Balcony, Completely Sweet, Undying Love, I'm Alone Because I Love You, Loving Time, Proud of You, Am I Blue, and then the classic 20 Flight Rock, which is one of two versions that he recorded. Not the single one. This one is still as good, I think. It's got more of a straight rock and roll beat to it, and it's got vocal backing by the Johnny Man Singers. They who later did Up and Away, I believe. Drive-In Show, Mean When I'm Mad, Stockings and Shoes, another great rock and roll number. Tell Me Why, Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, Cradle Baby, One Kiss. So, like I say, it combines rock and roll with ballads. But one thing it shows is Eddie Cochran's fantastic singing voice, and also his brilliant guitar playing as well. This really is a great one to get hold of. So Sing to My Baby, it was reissued on Liberty in the 1960s. So again, if this is you're looking for Eddie Cochran, then this is as good a one to start off with. But the London one is quite expensive, so the Liberty reissues are good to get hold of, not too difficult. And next is someone who's connected with Eddie Cochran, and this is Gene Vincent. And this is a nice copy of the album. I think it was the second one issued in Britain, Blue Jean Bop. Now I say there's a connection because, of course, Gene Vincent was in the terrible car crash that killed Eddie Cochran when they were both touring Britain in 1960. Gene Vincent was badly injured in it, and of course, sadly, Eddie Cochran died in the crash. But Gene Vincent made some great rock and roll records for Capitol between 1956 and about 1960-61. And this is a great album, and it's, again, a lovely original on the sort of light green Capitol label. Again, nice condition. And the tracks on this is Gene Vincent, the Blue Caps, his great band, Blue Jean Bop, Jezebel, Who Slapped John, Ain't She Sweet, which the Beatles did an early version of in their German days when it was released on Polydor. I Flipped, Waltz of the Wind, Jump Back Honey Jump Back, That Old Gang of Mine, Jumps, Giggles and Shouts, Up a Lazy River, Bop Street, Peg of My Heart. Again, a few ballads on here, but fantastic record. Some great tracks. The sleeve, again, a 1950s one, very flimsy, but it's held up well. No major problems with it. But Gene Vincent was he was known for his outlandish behaviour, and sadly, I guess his drinking, which got the better of him in the end. I think he drank allegedly because of the pain in his leg that he had, that he damaged in a motorcycle accident in his younger days. He went on to make some records in Britain in the 1960s, which I've not heard too many of, but I've heard that they're pretty decent. And he also made an album for John Peel's Dandelion label shortly before he died, which is worth getting hold of. But in the meantime, Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps got some great guitar playing from Cliff Gallup, incidentally, who I believe, it's Galloping Cliff Gallup lead guitar, Jumping Jack Neal bass, Wee Willie Williams rhythm guitar, Bebop Harold drums. Rock and roll doesn't come much better than this. So yeah, Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, Blue Jean Bot, 1957, I believe. Next artist, well, his importance can't be stressed really, because he influenced so many people. And it's Chuck Berry. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of Chuck Berry records around, compilations. Most people know all his great classics. What happened with his UK releases is, I think there was a one on, because he recorded for Chess Records in Chicago, and I think there was only one LP on London, who handled Chess Records distribution in Britain in the 1950s, and I think that was Rhythm and Blues with Chuck Berry, which is a very hard album to get hold of. Or it might have been One Dozen Berries. I think it may have been called that. Round about the turn of the 1960s, the Chess record catalogue was picked up by Pi in the UK. And at that point, Pi sort of promptly flooded the market with all sorts of Chuck Berry compilations, usually issued under the name of his hits, like You Never Can Tell and Nadine and things like that. So there are lots of them with all of his 50s recordings on there. What I got here is Chuck Berry's Golden Decade, which there were 3 volumes of this issued in the early 1970s. This particular one is an American pressing. I think it might be the second one as well, but it's on the Chess label after they'd been taken over by the All Platinum group in the 1970s. So it appears on that Chess label. Like I said, there were 2 more of these. So if you get all 3, then you pretty much got most of Chuck Berry's Chess output from the 60s, from the 50s and early 60s. This is a double. They're all double LPs, by the way. It's the inner with the gatefold. So on here we've got Maybelline, Deep Feeling, Johnny Be Good, Wee Wee Hours, Nadine, Roll Over Beethoven, School Days, Too Much Monkey Business, Memphis, Back in the USA, Bye Bye Johnny, Round and Round, Sweet Little 16, to name but a few. So if you're looking for Chuck Berry to start out your collection, then this is as good as any to start out with. One thing I don't especially like about these is they were rechanneled for stereo from the original mono recordings, which doesn't really do them any favour because there's a bit of echo on them. But if you can put up with that, or if you can find some earlier Pi International ones on mono, then you can't go wrong. So Chuck Berry's Golden Decade, well worth getting hold of. The next artist is someone who doesn't tend to get mentioned in rock and roll terminology, but as far as I'm concerned, he was an innovator. He was the man who was there right at the beginning of it and kind of created it, really. And this is Big Joe Turner. Now again, I don't have any original London label recordings or releases of Joe Turner stuff, but this one on the Charlie label from the 1980s, Jumping with Joe, is a great one to get, and it's got a load of his early to mid 50s jump jive classics. He was known as a blues shouter, but as far as I'm concerned, all this stuff here is rock and roll. Honey Hush, TV Mama, Shake, Rattle and Roll, the original recording before Elvis got hold of it, from 1954. Morning, Noon and Night, Flip Flop Fly, Chicken and the Hawk, Boogie Woogie Country Girl, Lipstick, Powder and Paint, Teenage Leather, We're Gonna Jump for Joy. They're all on here. Um, Big Joe Turner, fantastic swing, rock and roll, rhythm and blues. Do look out for this. He was a really important figure and made some classic records, and a lot of them are on here. So it's jumping with Joe, Big Joe Turner, and was on Charlie, and it's still pretty easy to find. Now, I mentioned at the start that Elvis, known to many as the King of Rock and Roll, that title didn't apply to him, in my opinion. It applied to this guy, who I've saved until the end. Little Richard. He was the man who created it all with his records. Many of his early classics are on this. Here's Little Richard, issued I believe in 1957 in the UK, on London. He was on Specialty Records in America, and I picked this one up for about 30 odd years ago, I think, but there's the lovely old Plum London label again, and this is in lovely condition. And what can you say about this? It's just got, I'll just read you the list of titles. Tutti Frutti, True Fine Mama, Can't Believe You Wanna Leave, Ready Teddy, Baby, Slipping and Sliding, Long Tall Sally, Miss Anne, Oh Why, Rip It Up, Jenny, She's Got It. How many people got turned on to rock and roll when they first heard these? Too many to mention. Absolute classic record, this. Again, recordings made between 1955 and 1957, put together in 1957 on one LP, but it's an absolute classic. Little Richard, there were two more. There was Here's Little Richard Volume 2, which has got things like Good Golly Miss Molly on it, and then there was Volume 3, which has also got some great tracks on it, and they were all pretty much covered his period at Specialty before he gave up music temporarily and started recording gospel music. When he came back into mainstream rock and roll in the 60s, he re-recorded a lot of his classics for labels like VJ, but they weren't as good as these. So again, you can't go wrong with Here's Little Richard, and to me, he was the king of rock and roll. The vocal style, the piano, the band with those great sax breaks on. People try to imitate it, but they did it okay. Elvis did Tutti Frutti, and Long Tall Sally, and he also did Shake, Rattle and Roll. But yeah, they were really pale imitations of what Little Richard and Joe Turner did, the original recordings. So yeah, if you want the bona fide, genuine stuff, then Little Richard, this album, and the Joe Turner I mentioned, they're the original ones to go for. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed this little run through some important 50s rock and roll artists. Do leave some comments. I'm sure you'll have some opinions of your own about who's the best. I unfortunately haven't been able to get hold of some by the great female rock and roll artists who, of course, were very important as well. Laverne Baker, Ruth Brown, Nellie Lutcher, I will be trying to get hold of some of their records in the next few months, and if I do, then I'll feature them in a video very soon, I hope. In the meantime, enjoy your music, and from Julian the Drummer, Bristol Record Collector, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.